I had left Diane's place with a piece of pumpkin bread wrapped in aluminum foil that I knew I wasn't going to eat. She offered 3 times. On the third, I took it. The wrapped loaf sat on the passenger seat the whole drive, and every now and then the glow from the dashboard would catch the foil and flash a sliver of silver at the corner of my eye. It was almost 11 at night when I left Enosburg Falls. The get-together had run longer than I'd planned, not for any bad reason. Just because my nephew Kevin brought his new girlfriend, and everybody wanted to be polite long enough to seem like they liked her. They did like her. So did I, honestly. But I had a conveyor belt at the sawmill waiting on me Monday morning. It had been making a strange noise for 14 days, and Marcus Webb kept insisting it was just a tension adjustment. I didn't think so. I kept turning that over in my head as I got on Route 105 heading toward Montgomery. Diane had asked me to stay the night, said the roads back were too dark, that there was no reason to rush. I told her I knew those roads by heart, that I'd been driving them my whole life. She said, "Okay, Cole," in that tone older sisters say for when you're about to do something stupid and they've already given up arguing. I took Gibu Road because it cuts about 12 minutes off the drive. I've known that route since I was 18. There's not much out that way. Pasture, a line of pine trees. The barn the Harrigan family let rot in the 90s that's somehow still standing. In a way I can't explain from a structural standpoint. And there's Longley Bridge, which crosses the Trout River about 2.5 miles before Montgomery Center. The bridge is covered. Wood. A sign at the entrance says 1863. Every time I drive through it during the day, I find myself thinking the support posts should have been replaced at least 15 years ago. I work with wood, so I see compromised wood everywhere. At night, inside the bridge, the sound changes quality. The floorboards echo differently, fuller, more enclosed, like the interior space swallows the engine noise and gives it back just slightly wrong. It's an effect I know. It doesn't bother me. I came in slow, not out of fear, out of the caution of someone who knows where the weak spots in the floor are. The boards knocked under the tires in an uneven sequence, a rhythm I recognize the way I recognize the sound of my own front door. A cold dampness rose through the gaps in the floor, the river running fast underneath from the rain earlier in the week. It smelled like old mud, like the mildew of waterlogged wood. A weekend work smell, not a danger smell. I was in the middle of the crossing when I heard it. It wasn't a soft thud. It was a heavy, dry impact, like a green log had dropped from a height directly onto the roof. The whole cab absorbed it. I felt it in my shoulders, my wrists, the seat. My hands closed around the steering wheel before I'd even thought about it. I braked by instinct. The tires slid slightly on the wet floor before catching. I stopped in the middle of the bridge. I sat there maybe 4 seconds. Then I started working through it. Thick branch shaken loose from one of the interior beams. Old wood snaps without warning. Or an animal, something that had been roosting in the upper framework of the bridge and fell. Longley has exposed beams up top, full of nests. That makes sense. I ran the numbers fast and the numbers gave me an acceptable answer. That's when I heard the second sound. Something was moving across the roof, slow, with weight. It started just above my seat and worked its way toward the back, toward the truck bed. Not sliding. Dragging. A mass with friction, adjusting as it moved, the way a bad stack of green logs will start settling under its own weight. The metal of the truck bed responded when it got there, a dull creak, the specific sound of sheet metal giving under localized pressure. I know that sound. It's not the sound a branch makes. I checked the rearview mirror. Just the darkness of the bridge behind me. I hit the gas, got out of the bridge. The headlights opened up Gibu Road ahead of me. Cracked asphalt, a mud ditch along the shoulder, the tree line maybe 60 feet back from the road. Everything where it was supposed to be. The foil-wrapped bread still caught the light on the passenger seat. For a moment, everything seemed in order. The movement appeared at the edge of the headlights. Not directly in them. In that strip where the light starts to dissolve and the dark takes over. Just above the embankment between the road and the Trout River. There was a dark, uneven mass moving parallel to the car. It didn't have the lightness of a deer. It didn't have the irregularity of a bear. It moved fast enough to hold its distance as I sped up, but never actually stepped into the light. I pressed down on the accelerator. The thing kept pace for maybe 200 yards. Then it was gone. I kept driving. I didn't stop. I'm not exactly sure why I didn't stop. I think part of me was still working through the possibilities, still trying to find one that fit. The mind does that when it doesn't want to accept that it's run out of options. Diane would say I should have stayed. The conveyor belt was going to make noise Monday morning either way. I got home at 11:14. I know because I looked at the clock when I turned off the engine. I left the pumpkin bread in the truck, went inside, went straight to bed and didn't sleep well, though back then I still couldn't have told you why. I woke up with the sun already high and lay there for a few minutes staring at the water stain in the corner of the bedroom ceiling. It's been there 3 years. Every time I look at it, I think I need to deal with that. I never do. The sleep had been bad without being exactly restless. The kind where you wake up feeling like you were awake the whole night, but you can't identify a single specific moment when you were conscious. I went to the kitchen, made coffee, walked to the window. Sunday morning in Montgomery Center looked exactly the way it always looks. Low fog over the Harrigan pasture. The sky the color of dirty water. No cars on the street. Normal. I spent the morning not thinking about the bridge. Or thinking about it, but in a managed way. The kind of thinking you do when you're filing a problem away to deal with later. Dented roof. Possible damage to the truck bed. Rudy Pelletier opened his shop early Monday morning. I'd stopped by before the sawmill. I ate lunch standing up. There were leftover rice and a can of tuna I'd forgotten was open in the fridge. I ate the rice without the tuna. It wasn't until the afternoon when I went out to the truck to get the pumpkin bread that I stopped. The truck bed had a dent, circular about 8 inches across, nearly dead center on the panel, deep enough that the depression had created radial hairline cracks in the paint around it. Those fine fractures that appear when metal yields all at once under concentrated weight, not when it strikes another piece of metal. I know the difference. I work with structure. A branch falls and rolls across the truck bed. It leaves a long scrape. A branch falls and stays put. It leaves a more oval dent with wood fibers pressed into it. This was different. Round. Clean. Too centered to have been accidental. I stood there looking at it for maybe 2 minutes. Then I got the pumpkin bread, went inside, threw away the aluminum foil, and ate 3 pieces standing at the sink. It was good. Diane's a good cook, always has been. What stayed with me that afternoon wasn't the dent. It was something else, and it took me a while to be able to put it into words. I went back through my memories of the night before, retracing the route, trying to locate some detail I might have missed. And that's when I noticed there hadn't been a single other car. From leaving Enosburg Falls to pulling into my driveway, over 40 minutes of driving, I hadn't passed anyone. Not coming the other way, not past anyone. Not seen a single set of headlights in the distance. Nothing. At the time, I processed that as a neutral data point. It's late, it's Sunday, it's October. The roads empty out early around here. That makes sense. I filed it away and never opened that file again. Today I understand it differently. I don't know exactly how this thing operates. I still don't, and I suspect nobody really does. But what I witnessed over the following weeks gave me the impression that when it wants someone, it goes after that someone alone. Not whoever happens to be nearby, not whatever is easiest. It selects. And when it selects, it seems like the world around that person quietly empties out, without anyone noticing that it did. The deserted road wasn't a coincidence of timing. It was the arrangement. I just didn't know how to read it back then. Monday morning, before daybreak, I went to Rudy's shop. He opened at 6:30, and he was the kind of man who'd be there since 6, standing around watching the clock. When I pulled up, the gate was already open, and he was holding a coffee mug that had to be his second, judging by how awake he was. I showed him the dent. He crouched down, ran his thumb along the edge of the depression, stood back up, and took a sip of coffee. "Branch," he said. "That round?" "Branch knot. Green wood gets hard as rock when the temperature drops." He touched the edge again. "Nothing else got hit. Just here. You come through Longley at night?" I said yes. He nodded like that explained everything. "Those upper beams up there are full of rotted junk. One time, a piece of beam came through Darnell's window. His car window, I mean, not his house. Put a foot-wide hole in his roof. Darnell thought it was a gunshot. He let out a short laugh. It wasn't a gunshot. I listened to all of it, nodding along. Rudy's explanation was technically plausible. He knows wood as well as I do. But when I got to the sawmill afterward and Marcus asked how the weekend was, I said, quiet, and left it at that. It wasn't out of embarrassment. I'm not embarrassed to report facts. It was because I still didn't know what the facts were. I had pieces. The impact, the dragging, the dent, the empty road, the thing on the riverbank. And they didn't fit any pattern I could name with confidence. And I'm not the kind of man who goes around talking about what he can't name. Marcus told me the belt had made that strange noise again the morning before. Higher pitched this time, like metal scraping. I went to take a look. The slack was exactly what I'd suspected, not what he thought. I made the adjustment myself. Took 40 minutes. For a while, that gave me a sense that things were in order, that I understood the mechanisms around me, that what had happened on the bridge had an explanation I just hadn't found yet. The belt had slack, the slack was fixed. Everything went back to working right. I should have known better than that. Mechanisms you don't understand, don't wait until you're ready to present the next problem. Wednesday morning, Marcus came into the sawmill with a story. He'd seen a dead deer on the bank of the Trout River, about 200 yards below Longley Bridge, when he drove down the dirt access road that leads to the storage shed. He said he stopped because he figured it might be a deer someone had hit and left. It happens, the county has rules about that, and not everybody follows them. But when he went to take a closer look, he came back not wanting to look again. It was open, he said. He stood in the doorway of the office, not coming in. Not the way a coyote does it. Coyotes eat, you know. This thing hadn't eaten anything, it just opened it. I looked at him for a moment. Marcus is 34, grew up hunting with his father, has dressed more deer than I have. He's not the type to come back from something wearing that expression. I told him I'd go take a look at the end of the shift. I went alone, a little after 4. The sun was already low, that late afternoon October light that makes everything look slightly orange and colder than it is. The riverbank there is muddy, covered in roots exposed by erosion, with pieces of limestone jutting up through the mud. It smelled like running water and rotting vegetation, normal for that time of year. The deer was about 50 feet from the water's edge. It was an adult buck. Big, I estimated around 300 pounds, maybe more. Was on its side, the back legs partially in the water, the head turned upward at an angle that wasn't natural even in death. What caught my attention first was exactly what Marcus had described. The animal was open, from the shoulder down to the flank, in a line that didn't follow any predator logic I know of. It wasn't a bite. It wasn't scratch marks from multiple passes. It was one continuous opening, deep, made in a single motion. The left side ribs were exposed and 2 of them were broken outward. Not inward, outward. As if something had worked its fingers between the bones and pulled them apart. I stood there looking for what was probably too long. I work with wood, not with flesh. But the force mechanics required to break an adult deer's ribs outward are considerable. I did the math involuntarily, the way I do when I look at a beam and estimate the load it can carry. The number I arrived at was not the number for a coyote. It wasn't the number for a black bear, which is the biggest predator we have around here. It was a different number. The smell was bad, dense, with a metallic undertone that settled in the back of your throat. Not the ordinary smell of a dead animal. There was something else mixed into it that I couldn't identify. Organic, but wrong in a way I couldn't name. I looked at the ground around it. The mud on the bank was marked. Not deer hooves, not bear claws. I know both, I've seen them plenty of times. These were deep pressure marks, irregular, elongated, as if something heavy had stepped there with its weight distributed in a way that doesn't match any 4-legged animal I know of. And there was a stretch of about 10 feet, where the low vegetation along the bank had been laid flat, not trampled randomly, but pressed down in a single direction, the way a wide board leaves a trail when you drag it across wet grass. Something had passed through there with weight and volume. The direction was from the river toward the road, toward Longley Bridge. I left. I didn't run. I walked fast, which is different. Got in the truck, started the engine, sat there for about 30 seconds without putting it in gear. I could still hear the river outside, that steady sound of current moving over rock. At some point, a light wind had picked up, and the trees on the far bank were swaying in a way that looked completely normal, and for that very reason bothered me. I drove back to the sawmill. Marcus was still there, sweeping out the shed. When he saw me walk in, he stopped and waited. "You were right," I said. He nodded slowly. "What was it?" "I don't know." He was quiet for a moment, then went back to sweeping. I appreciated that about him. He didn't push for an explanation where I didn't have one to give. That night I called Diane. Not to tell her anything, I just called. She was watching some TV show. I could hear a host's voice in the background. We talked for about 20 minutes about nothing in particular. Kevin, the state of the roads after all the rain, whether I'd eaten the pumpkin bread. I lied and said I'd really enjoyed it. She said she knew I would. I hung up and sat in the kitchen for a while without turning on the light when it got dark. I wasn't scared, or at least that's not what I would have called it at that moment. It was more like that feeling you get when you're inspecting a structure and you start to realize the problem is bigger than it looked from the outside. Not panic, just the quiet recognition that the job is going to take longer than you planned. I went to bed early. Before I turned off the light, I noticed I'd closed the bedroom windows without thinking about it. I hadn't done that since summer. On Thursday, I got a call from the Richford Co-op saying the truck with the pine delivery was going to arrive Friday in the early hours because the driver had had a mechanical issue in Burlington and needed to push the delivery back to 5 in the morning. Someone had to be at the sawmill to receive it. Marcus couldn't. Young daughter, fever, all that. So it was me. I left the house at 4:20, still dark. The car thermometer read 36 degrees. I drove slow because there was low fog covering the open pasture stretches, the kind that shows up when the temperature drops fast overnight and the ground is still wet. The road was empty, the way it always is at that hour, and the headlights cut through the fog without clearing it, just pushed it aside as I moved forward, and it closed back in behind me. The heater smelled like burning plastic the way it always does in the first few minutes of cold weather. I never got that fixed. About 10 minutes into the drive, I saw the first deer. It was standing on the shoulder, completely still, facing the dense brush along the right side of the road. It didn't look at the car as I passed. A deer standing still at night isn't unusual. They freeze when they catch headlights, but this one wasn't looking at the light. It was looking into the woods. That specific posture they take when they've caught the scent of a predator. The whole body tilted slightly forward, ears pointed in the same direction. I slowed down a little and watched as I went by. The deer didn't move. About 300 yards ahead, there was another one. Same behavior, standing still, facing the tree line, completely ignoring the car. Then another, maybe 100 yards past that. 3 animals, on the same side of the road, all pointing in the same direction like compass needles. I stopped counting after the third. What stayed with me was the direction. They were all looking east, toward the river. I kept driving. The shipment arrived at 5:18, late, and the driver was a man of few words who signed the paperwork without taking off his hat and was gone before it got light. I helped Marcus organize the logs in the shed when he showed up at 7. I didn't mention the deer. He didn't ask how the early morning had gone. That night, driving home after dinner I made myself, and it didn't turn out well. I tried a stir-fry Diane makes fine that in my hands turned into something without a name. I found myself thinking again about the empty road. Not that night, Thursday night, the night of the bridge. I'd already gone over this that Sunday in the kitchen, but now I had the deer to compare it to. The deer had sensed something on the riverbank and had stopped, all facing the same direction, all on alert. None of them running. When deer run, they run. This was something else. It was the stage before flight, when the animal is calculating whether the danger is close enough to justify burning the energy. And I had driven down that road without seeing a single animal. No deer standing still, no raccoon crossing, no bird flying low. Nothing. And before, I had filed that away as an empty road in the early morning hours, October cold. But now I had the image of those 3 deer standing like fence posts on the road's shoulder, completely indifferent to a car with its headlights on passing 5 yards from them, and I started to think that maybe the absence of animals that night wasn't an absence at all. It was an evacuation. That something had moved along the bank of the Trout River ahead of me, and everything with legs had cleared out before I arrived, and that I had driven into that empty space without knowing it had been emptied on purpose. I can say it more clearly now. When this thing wants you, the world around you doesn't disappear by accident. It gets cleared out. I don't know if that's intentional on its part. I have no way of knowing what goes on inside it. But that's the effect. You end up alone with it without realizing you have been. The road with no cars, the bank with no animals, the silence that just feels like early morning silence. Everything seems normal because every separate piece has a normal explanation. It's only when you put the pieces together that you see you were the only human being in that stretch for too long. That Thursday night before bed, I called Rudy. I didn't have a specific reason. I asked if he'd heard anything about a dead animal on the riverbank. He was quiet for a second. "Deer?" he said. "Deer. The Pelletier over at the farm found 2 cattle in the pasture on Tuesday." A pause. "But cattle's cattle, Cole. Sometimes they die. The same way the deer died?" Another pause, longer. "You ought to come by tomorrow," he said finally. Not like an invitation, like it was necessary. I told him I would. I hung up and sat staring at the kitchen window, which was solid black outside. Beyond the glass, the wind moved through the tops of the pine trees with that steady sound I hear every night and normally don't register. That night, I registered it. I sat there waiting for the sound to change. It didn't. I went to sleep with the hallway light on, something I haven't done since I was young. It took me a while to admit to myself that I'd done it on purpose. I went to Rudy's shop on Saturday morning. He was waiting outside, which was unusual because October in Montgomery brings that damp cold that gets in through your collar and doesn't leave. He had his hands shoved in the pockets of his coveralls and was looking out at the street with an expression I couldn't quite place at the time. Not exactly worry, more the face of someone waiting to confirm something they've already decided they don't like. He drove me out to the Pelletier farm. Not his. The cousin, Arden Pelletier, who runs about 80 head of cattle on a pasture that borders dense forest on the east side. We made the trip mostly without talking. Rudy turned on the radio for a couple of minutes and switched it off without explaining why. The fence was broken. Not bent, not knocked down by cattle pushing from the inside out. I know what that damage looks like. I've repaired it enough times. It was broken. 3 treated wooden posts, each about 5 inches in diameter, snapped off about 2 feet from the ground. Snapped, not pulled out. The wood was spiraled at the break, the kind of twist that happens when lateral force and rotational force act at the same time. I picked up one of the pieces from the ground and looked at the cross-section. The fibers had opened from the inside out. "How many?" I asked. "2, Rudy said. The others disappeared. Arden tracked them to the tree line and stopped following. I looked at the woods. Dense, dark even in the morning sun, the kind of growth that closes completely about 10 feet in from the edge. The wind didn't reach in there. I could see the leaves at the border moving and know that further in it was still and quiet. "He went up to the tree line alone?" I asked. He did. And stopped. Stopped. Rudy didn't elaborate. I stood looking at the broken posts. I ran the numbers again, the same calculation I'd done on the riverbank Wednesday. The figure was similar, larger maybe. That's when I heard the 2 remaining cattle. They were in the far corner of the pasture, about 200 feet from us, pressed against the corner post as if they were trying to occupy the same point in space. They weren't grazing. They were standing still, heads down, eyes too wide. Cattle aren't animals that show fear in obvious ways. They're heavy, slow. They don't have the hair-trigger nervous system of a deer. But when cattle go quiet the way those 2 were quiet, with that specific rigidity that isn't rest, you recognize it. They were looking at the tree line. I walked slowly toward them, not to get close, just to change my angle of view. The pasture sloped gently toward the tree line, and from where I'd been standing I couldn't see the forest edge clearly. When I'd walked about 50 feet, I stopped. There was something at the edge of the woods. Not inside. At the edge. Right on the line where the light stopped and the dark began. A dark, irregular mass, motionless. Too tall for a deer, too wide for a man. It stayed completely still while I watched, and I watched long enough to be certain it wasn't a tree trunk, wasn't a branch shadow, wasn't any of the things your mind offers up when it wants to solve the problem quickly. It stayed still. I stayed still. The two cattle didn't move. Then, slowly, the mass pulled back. It didn't turn. It pulled back. It moved into the woods without disturbing the branches at the edge, without making any sound that reached me. It just kept getting smaller until it wasn't there anymore. I walked back to Rudy. He was standing with his back to me, looking at the broken posts. "There's something in the woods," I said. He didn't turn around right away. Then he did, looked at me, looked at the tree line. "Bear," he said. But he said it the way you fill out a form, not the way you believe what you're writing. "It's not a bear." He didn't answer. He pulled his car keys out of his pocket and started walking toward the road. I followed. Neither of us looked back before getting in the car, but I'm almost certain we both wanted to. On the way back, Rudy told me something that stuck. He said it without looking at me, eyes on the road. He said that about 6 years ago, a hunter from out of town, someone from Burlington who came to the area every fall, didn't come back from a trip near the Green River. They found his gear scattered over an area of about 60 feet. They never found him. "Did they find anything on the gear?" I asked. "They found marks," he said, and didn't continue. I asked what kind of marks. "The kind the sheriff logged as bear and closed the case on because that's what fit on the form." We were quiet the rest of the way back. When he stopped in front of my truck, he said, "Take care of yourself, Cole," with a seriousness that seemed out of place to me at the time. Now I understand he was telling me something he couldn't say directly, that he'd reached the edge of what he could name, and that beyond that edge he didn't know how to help me. I drove home with the windows up and the heat on full, even though I wasn't cold. That night I couldn't stay still inside the house. I kept straightening things that didn't need straightening. I rehung tools on the garage pegboard in order of size, reorganized a shelf of screws by diameter. I worked at that for about 2 hours. It's what I do when I need to think without looking like I'm thinking. What stayed with me from the afternoon was the image of that mass at the edge of the woods, standing still, looking. Not at the cattle. I'm certain of that now. When I shifted my position in the pasture and the angle between us changed, the thing didn't adjust its gaze toward the cattle. It adjusted toward me. I called Trooper Oates on Monday morning. It wasn't an easy decision to make, not because I'm too proud to ask for help, but because I didn't know exactly what I was going to say. "There's something large in the woods near the Trout River," isn't the kind of report a state trooper can do much with. But 2 dead cattle, broken fence posts, and a hunter from Burlington, who became a closed case 6 years ago, all of that together seemed like enough to at least have a conversation. Oates picked up on the second ring. Direct voice, no runaround. I explained who I was, where I lived, what I'd seen at Arden's farm. I heard her writing something down on the other end. When I finished, she asked if I'd photographed the broken posts or the deer on the riverbank. I hadn't. She didn't say I should have, but the 1 second of silence before she kept talking said it for her. She asked if I'd contacted the State Wildlife Service, if anyone had formally reported the dead animals. I said I didn't know. She said she'd checked the records, that she'd talked to the Troy Post about patrols in the area, and that if I saw something concrete, I should call her right away. "What do you mean by concrete?" I asked. A pause. "Something I can put in a report," she said. I thanked her and hung up. I sat looking at the phone for a moment. I wasn't frustrated with her. She was being straight with me about what her job allowed. I was frustrated with the fact that all I had were fence posts that could have been a bear, a split-open deer that could have been coyotes, a dent in the truck bed that could have been a branch, and a thing at the edge of the woods that could have been a shadow to anyone who wasn't there. Each piece on its own fit some explanation. It was only when you stacked them all together that the stack got too high. Tuesday afternoon, Marcus told me that the Hendricks orchard had gotten an electric fence overnight. Gary Hendricks has an apple orchard about 1.5 miles from the sawmill, on the west side of the road. He sells to a co-op in Morrisville and to some local stores. I buy apples from him every fall. They're good, firm, keep for weeks. Marcus had driven past the orchard that morning and seen 2 workers installing the fence with a speed he described as the kind of speed of someone who didn't sleep. "Did you stop?" I asked. I stopped. One of them said they'd had a problem with an animal. Didn't want to say which one. I went by at the end of the day. Gary was in the sorting shed when I arrived, running apples along a conveyor belt that made a steady, monotonous sound of belt over pulley. It smelled like ripe apples and damp sawdust. There's a co-op calendar tacked to the wall with delivery dates marked in red pen. 2 months ago, I would have walked into that shed and not noticed a single specific detail. Now I noticed everything. Gary is 61 with the kind of face that comes from spending a life outdoors. When he saw me, he switched off the belt. The silence that moved in when the belt stopped was complete and sudden, the kind that seems louder than the noise that came before it. "Cole," he said. He didn't look surprised to see me. I asked about the electric fence. He stood there a moment with his hands resting on the edge of the conveyor. Then he told me that Monday night, around 11, he'd heard a noise coming from the orchard. Not barking, not the sound of a deer moving through the trees. A sound he described as live wood being bent, the sound a young trunk makes when lateral pressure goes past its elastic point, right before it gives. From a full-grown apple tree. He'd gone out to look with a flashlight. "And?" I asked. 3 trees knocked down, not uprooted, bent at the base. The roots were still in the ground. He ran his hand across his chin. "And the smell?" I asked what smell. He thought for a second, like someone trying to find the right word in a vocabulary that wasn't made for it. "Butcher shop," he said, but with something underneath, something that isn't meat. I stayed quiet. It was the same smell I'd caught on the riverbank the previous Wednesday, crouched over the split-open deer. Similar enough that I didn't need any more context. "Did you see anything?" I asked. I did. He looked at the idle conveyor. Not enough. It was dark and the flashlight didn't reach far enough. A pause. "But it was big, Cole. It was big in a way it shouldn't be." I left the shed with 2 bags of apples he insisted on giving me and that I paid for anyway. I walked to the truck slowly. The orchard was to the left of the shed, and from where I stood I could see the line of apple trees running back into the property, each one evenly spaced, each one heavy with fruit still waiting to be picked. It was a completely ordinary scene with the late golden afternoon light falling across the red apples. In the middle of the row, there was an empty space. 3 trees missing, their bases still visible as low, raw stumps, the interior wood exposed and white. The ground around them was torn up. From the gap where the trees had been, I had a clear line of sight straight into the dark woods at the far end. And for a moment, I can't explain this right, I had the very specific feeling that the darkness back in there was more concentrated than it should have been. Not shadow, density. Like when you're adjusting the lighting in a shed and you notice one of the fixtures isn't out. It's being blocked by something that shouldn't be in front of it. I got in the truck, started the engine. I called Oates while I was still in Gary's dirt parking lot. I told her I had something concrete now. She said she'd come by the next morning. I drove home with the apple bags on the back seat. At some point, one of them tipped over and the apples rolled across the floor, and I heard each one knocking against the others in the dark behind me, and my hand closed around the steering wheel before I realized it had. Oates arrived Wednesday morning with another trooper who didn't introduce himself, and who stood near her car the whole visit, with the expression of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. They went to Gary's orchard, went to Arden's farm, looked at the broken posts that Arden had left in place for some reason he didn't explain. I went with them. Oates was methodical. She photographed everything, wrote everything down, asked specific questions without asking unnecessary ones. I appreciated that about her. When we got to the fence posts, she crouched down and examined the fractured cross-section of wood with the same attention I'd given it the week before. She stayed down longer than I expected. "A bear doesn't do this," she said, without looking at me. "No," I agreed. She was quiet for a moment. Then she stood up and wrote something else down. She said she'd contact the State Wildlife Service, that she'd request nighttime patrols in the area, that she'd check records of large animal sightings in the region over the past few months. She said all of it in the voice of someone who knows each step is going to take time, and that time is exactly the resource the situation doesn't seem to have. Before she left, she asked for my cell number and told me to call if I saw anything. Anything at all, she repeated, with an emphasis that seemed directed at herself as much as at me. That night, Marcus called me at 10:30. He was in the sawmill's truck, an old Ford F-250 we use for local material runs. He'd gone out to pick up a load of structural bolts that a supplier from Jeffersonville had left at a warehouse about 20 minutes from the sawmill, because the supplier needed the space by the next morning, and I'd forgotten to pick them up during the day. My fault. I sent Marcus because he was closer. His voice was off, not scared. Marcus doesn't scare easy. It was more controlled, the kind of voice a person uses when they're choosing their words as they go so they don't say the wrong thing. The truck stopped, he said. Engine, lights, everything. Just stopped in the middle of the road. Tried to restart it 3 times. Nothing. I asked where he was. He gave me a reference point I knew. A stretch of road with no streetlights, dense woods on both sides. The kind of place where cell service is spotty. You got signal where you are? I'm calling you, so yeah. A short pause. Weak. I said I was on my way. He said you don't have to, but said it too fast. The way you say it when you do have to and don't want to admit it. I grabbed the big flashlight from the garage, the one I use for structural inspections, and headed out. I got there about 20 minutes later. The truck was on the shoulder, the hazard lights off because they hadn't come on when the engine died. Marcus was inside with the doors locked. He only opened up when I knocked on the window, and he saw my flashlight. He got out with an expression I've carried with me ever since. It wasn't the face of fear. It was the face after fear, when the nervous system has already processed it, and what's left is a kind of rigid exhaustion. What happened? I asked. He looked at the tree line on the right side of the road. The truck stopped. I waited for it to restart. A pause. Then I heard it. What? Breathing. He said the word slowly, like he was testing whether it fit. From outside. Near the passenger door, not a small animal, and the volume was wrong for a small animal. I stayed still. The thing stood there for maybe 2 minutes, maybe more. Did you see it? I didn't turn on the flashlight. He looked at me. Didn't want to. I understood. There are moments when instinct knows that seeing is worse than not seeing, and arguing with your instinct in those moments is a waste of time. I went around to the passenger side with the flashlight. The ground was wet with dew. The temperature had dropped since I'd left the house. I aimed the light down at the ground along the side of the truck. There were marks in the mud on the shoulder. Deep, elongated, irregular. The same pattern I'd seen on the riverbank. 3, 4 clear impressions, and then the pattern dissolved into the taller grass beyond the shoulder. The weight was considerable. The mud had given way about 1.5 inches in each mark. I slowly raised the flashlight beam to the tree line. Nothing. Just darkness and branches. I tried to restart the truck. On the 4th attempt, the engine turned over like it had never stopped. No hesitation, no hiccup. No mechanical explanation for having stopped in the first place. I spent about 10 minutes checking the battery, alternator, connections. Everything normal. Marcus stood outside while I checked, his back to the truck, watching the road. You think she made the truck stop? He asked when I finished. I don't know what she does. I closed the hood. I know the truck stopped and then started itself. He nodded. Didn't ask anything else. We drove back separately. Me in front, Marcus behind. I watched the rearview mirror the whole way. Not to see if Marcus was following, but out of a habit I'd developed over the past few days without noticing exactly when it had started. I didn't see anything except the truck's headlights behind me the whole time, but there was one stretch, about 1/3 of a mile before Montgomery Center, where the road bends sharply to the right and the woods come right up to the left shoulder. When I came around that bend, the temperature inside the car dropped noticeably. Not the heater failing. I know what that feels like. It was a quick, localized drop, like when you open the door of a walk-in cooler for 2 seconds and close it again. I looked at the left shoulder. I didn't see anything, but the smell came in through the gap in the cracked window, dense with that metallic undertone, organic in the wrong way, and filled my car long enough for me to be certain. She wasn't in the woods at that moment. She was on the edge of the road, in the dark between two utility poles where the headlights didn't reach, and I had passed maybe 12 feet away. I got home, locked the door, called Oates and she didn't answer, left a message, sat in the kitchen chair and stared at the pattern on the tablecloth my ex-wife had left when she moved out 8 years ago, which I never replaced because I never cared enough to buy a new one. Called Marcus at 11:30. He picked up on the first ring. "You make it home?" I asked. "Yeah." "You okay?" A pause. "Got the TV on," he said. I understood. I said goodnight and hung up. I sat in the kitchen for another hour before going to bed, and when I did, I brought the big flashlight with me and left it on the nightstand, as though that was going to do me any good. Oates called me Thursday morning, early, before 7. She said she'd gotten my message, that she'd stopped by the sawmill at noon, that the Wildlife Service had confirmed records of abnormal animal activity in the area over the past 3 weeks, but that they were still assessing the type of animal involved. She said that last part with a neutrality that seemed to cost her some effort. I said that was fine, that I'd see her at noon. At 8:40, Marcus called me from the sawmill. His voice was different from the night before, flatter. "Cole, you need to come in now. The lumber storage shed is at the back of the sawmill. A long building, metal sheet roof, concrete block walls halfway up with treated wood framing on the upper half. We store logs there that haven't gone through the cutting line yet, stacked in parallel rows with aisle spacing between them." When I walked in, Marcus was standing in the center aisle with an expression I'd seen once before in my life, on a cousin of mine who witnessed a serious workplace accident, present and absent at the same time. The back wall was compromised. 4 structural posts of treated wood, each about 6 inches thick, and were broken. Not at floor level, not at the base where wood is most vulnerable to moisture. They were broken at approximately 4 feet off the ground, all at the same relative point, as if something had pushed from the outside with force concentrated in a horizontal band. The concrete block below was untouched. The sheet metal above was bent inward but not breached. Only the wood in the middle had given way. The opening this created was about 3 feet wide by 2 feet tall. On the outside, in the packed dirt, there were marks. I knew what they were before I crouched down to look. "Did it get inside?" I asked. "I don't know," Marcus said. "It was like this when I got here. I didn't go in to check." I looked into the storage shed. The rows of logs created narrow corridors running to the back of the building, about 100 feet long. The lighting was 4 fluorescent fixtures, 2 of which were out. They'd gone out the week before, and I still hadn't replaced the bulbs. There were stretches of dense shadow between the stacked wood, wide enough to contain anything that could fit through the hole in the wall. I grabbed the flashlight I'd brought from the truck, went in. The smell hit before anything else. That smell. Butcher shop with a metallic undertone, organic in the wrong way. More concentrated than any time before. It settled in the back of your throat and didn't leave. I breathed through my mouth. I moved slowly down the center aisle, the flashlight sweeping the gaps between the stacks. Treated lumber, pine knots, resin, those smells I know. And I could mentally separate them from the other one, the wrong one. I got to the middle of the shed. I stopped. In the aisle to my right, about 40 feet away, there was something. I didn't see all of it. I never saw all of it. But what the flashlight caught in that second was enough for my body to make a decision before I finished processing what my eyes had sent. A leg, part of a leg, from the knee down, or what functioned as a knee, the joint too wide. The angle wrong for anything I'd ever seen standing upright. The fur sparse, irregular, with strips of grayish skin visible between the patches. The foot, if it was a foot, ended in something that pressed into the dirt floor and left the mark I'd learned to recognize. The scale of it was what stopped my breathing. It wasn't an exaggeration of memory, wasn't distortion from fear. It was real, and it was large. Above the knee, shadow. I didn't see any more. The thing didn't move when the beam hit it. It stayed still. I stayed still. It was maybe 3 seconds. I can't say precisely because in that interval time did that strange thing it does in moments like this. It went slow and fast at the same time, and the only organized thought I managed to form was completely useless. I should have replaced those fluorescent bulbs last week. Then I heard Marcus from outside. He had come in through the hole in the back wall. I hadn't asked him to come in. He came in. I heard his breathing, the sound of his footsteps on the dirt floor, and I knew exactly where he was. In the aisle parallel to mine, separated from me by a row of pine logs 2 feet in diameter, about 25 feet from the thing. What happened in the next 10 seconds is the part I can't organize in a linear way when I try to tell it. The thing moved, not toward me, sideways in the direction of the aisle where Marcus was, fast with a weight that vibrated through the dirt floor and that I felt in the soles of my feet. The logs in the row between us groaned with the pressure of the displaced air. I heard Marcus stop walking. I shouted his name. Not a warning shout. A shout to make noise, to fill the space with sound because it was the only resource I had in that moment. I shouted, and at the same time I moved, not thinking about direction, just moving. And what happened was that I ran into the right-hand aisle heading toward the back of the building, where I knew there was a side door that Marcus used as a shortcut to the outdoor stockpile. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open and went through. Marcus came out through the hole in the wall 2 seconds later. I know it was 2 seconds because I counted without meaning to, the way the mind counts things when it has nothing more useful to do. He was in one piece. He had a cut on his left forearm that he couldn't explain afterward. Not deep, but long. The kind that splintered wood makes when you move fast past it. Or a claw if the angle is right. We stood outside the shed, the two of us not talking. The storage shed was quiet. No sound from inside, no movement visible through the hole in the wall. The smell was still there, fainter outside, but present. Then I heard something I wasn't expecting. From inside the shed, in the silence that came after everything. A slow, heavy, rhythmic sound. Not a growl, not breathing. It was the sound of something moving between the rows of logs with the specific calm of something that isn't in a hurry. Heading toward the hole in the back wall. Heading toward us. We walked to the truck. We didn't run. We walked fast, which is different, but this time the difference was smaller. I called Oates from inside the truck with the engine running. She picked up on the second ring. I told her where I was. Told her what had happened. Told her I needed her to come now. "I'm 40 minutes out," she said. "That's fine. Get away from the location, Cole." "Already have." I looked at Marcus. He had his right hand pressed against the cut on his left forearm, staring at the windshield. There was a blood stain on the sleeve of his jacket, small, about the size of a coin. The jacket was orange, one of those work jackets with the reflective strip. He'd worn it every morning for 2 years. I'd never noticed the color before. We sat in the truck with the engine running and waited 43 minutes for Oates. Neither of us suggested leaving. Oates arrived with the other trooper, and a third one I hadn't seen before. Older, with the expression of a supervisor who looks at a scene and is already drafting the report in his head before he walks in. She had me repeat everything twice while the older one inspected the outside of the storage shed. Marcus sat in the truck with the door open, answering the second trooper's questions in a low voice. The orange jacket sleeve rolled up, the cut on his forearm already clotted. I told them everything. The bridge, the deer, the fence posts, Gary's orchard, the stalled truck, the storage shed. I told it in the right order, with the right dates, without exaggerating anything. I measure and grade lumber for a living. Reporting with precision is what I do. Oates wrote it all down without interrupting me, which I appreciated. When I finished, she went into the storage shed with her flashlight. She was in there about 15 minutes. The supervisor stayed outside the whole time, which I noticed but didn't mention. When she came out, she had an expression I couldn't read at the time. It wasn't skepticism. I would have recognized skepticism. It was something closer to the face Rudy had made at Arden's farm, when he looked at the broken posts and said, "Bear, the way you fill out a form." "The posts are broken," she said. "The marks on the floor are there." "I know." "The problem," she said and stopped. Started again. The problem is what I can put in the report. I understood where this was going. I told her I understood. Structural damage of undetermined cause, she said. Large animal, species unidentified. That's what fits. She looked at me with a straightforwardness I respected. It's not what happened, but it's what I can write. I said that was fine. I wasn't angry. She was working within the limits of her system, and her system didn't have a box for what was happening near the Trout River. What shook everything was the supervisor's testimony. He had gone into the shed, not with Oates, afterward alone while she was talking to me. He was in there about 5 minutes. When he came out, he pulled Oates aside, and they spoke quietly for about 2 minutes. I didn't hear any of it, but I saw the moment she stopped writing in her notepad and just listened. Then he came to talk to me. He asked in a completely neutral voice whether I had been inside the shed over the weekend. I said no, that the building had been locked since Friday. He nodded slowly, asked whether anyone from the sawmill had authorization to come in on the weekend. I said no, that only Marcus and I had keys. Why? I asked. He hesitated for a beat that was too long to be casual. In the back of the shed, he said. Left side, last row of logs. There are marks on the wood, about 6 feet off the ground, give or take. I went to look. Oates came with me. The marks were on top of a row of pine logs, on the 2 uppermost logs in the stack. Claw marks. There was no other word for it. Parallel grooves, deep, in the treated pine. 4 grooves per set, irregular spacing between them. 2 sets of marks, as if something had rested its weight there. What stopped me was the height. I'm 5 feet 10. The marks were about an inch above the top of my head, and the logs were 2 feet in diameter. The row was 4 logs high, each one 2 feet across. Whatever had left those marks was standing upright, resting its weight on its arms, at a height equal to the top of a stack of 8 feet of timber. Oates photographed everything without saying a word. The supervisor said, still in that neutral voice, that the marks were consistent with a large black bear in a bipedal position. He said it looking at the photos on Oates's camera, not at me. I didn't say anything. A black bear standing upright reaches about 6 feet, maybe 6'3" in exceptional cases. The marks were at 8 feet. The math didn't add up, and all 3 of us knew the math didn't add up. Nobody said that out loud. Oates stayed until mid-afternoon. Before she left, she pulled me aside, away from the other 2. Cole. She lowered her voice a little. Not much. I need to ask you something I'm not going to put in any report. I told her she could ask. Do you think it's still in the area? I didn't answer right away. I thought about the question honestly. I don't know if it ever left, I said. I think it was here before I started noticing it. Oates was quiet for a moment. Then she said she'd try to make sure there was nighttime patrol on the road for at least a week. Said if I needed anything, any time, to call her. She said it in a way that seemed genuine. When the 3 of them left, Marcus and I stood in the sawmill parking lot. The sun was already low, that copper-colored light that comes before dark in October. Marcus looked at the storage shed and said he was going to reinforce the wall with sheet metal before he went home. Said he had materials in stock. We worked until dark, the 2 of us in silence, bolting steel panels over the hole in the posts. Marcus is good with his hands, faster than me on fastening work. At some point he turned on the portable radio in the shed to a country station he always listens to, and that I normally ask him to change. I didn't ask that night. When we finished, the wall was reinforced. It wasn't a guarantee of anything. I knew that, and Marcus knew it. But it was something concrete we'd made with our hands that was still standing when we were done. Sometimes that's enough to get through the night. Marcus left first. Before he got in his car, he stopped with his hand on the door and said, without looking at me, "You going to stay in Montgomery?" I didn't answer right away. "I don't know yet," I said, and that was the truth. He nodded like it was the answer he'd been expecting. Got in the car and drove away. I stood in the empty parking lot for a few minutes, listening to the sound of his engine fading down the road. Then I got in my truck, started the engine, and called Diane. She picked up on the 3rd ring. Said hi, asked how I was doing. I said I was fine. I asked if she had room for me for a few days. A short pause. Did something happen? I think I'm going to get out of Montgomery for a while. She didn't ask anything else. Said she had room, that she could have the bedroom ready by tomorrow. Said, "Okay, Cole." Not in that older sister tone of someone who's given up arguing. A different tone. One I couldn't place at the time and only understood later, when I was already on the road. It was relief. She was relieved I'd called. I woke up Friday before the alarm. I lay there for a few seconds in the dark, listening to the house. Nothing out of place. The refrigerator running its cycle, the wind outside, the normal creak of floorboards expanding in the cold. Sounds I know by heart. I got up, made coffee, went to the guest room I never use and pulled the suitcase out from under the bed. It was covered in dust. I've never traveled enough to justify a better one. I packed slowly. Not much. Clothes for about 10 days. Documents, the small toolbox I bring when I'm away for more than a week because I never know when I'll need it. I left most things where they were. I didn't know if I was leaving for a week or longer, and acting like I did felt wrong. I called Marcus at 7:30. Told him I'd be out for a few days, that he should keep things running at the sawmill, that the belt needed inspection on Thursday. He said he knew, that he could handle it. He didn't ask where I was going. I appreciated that. At 8:20, I loaded the suitcase into the truck, locked the house, and stood on the front step for a moment looking at the street. Montgomery Center was quiet the way it always is early in the morning. No movement. The streetlight still on even though it had already gotten light. The fog covering the Harrigan pasture across the road. A scene I've known for 50 years. I got in the truck. I took Route 118 toward Enosburg Falls. It's the main road, the one I should have taken the night of the bridge. About 12 minutes longer, no covered bridges, no stretches of dense woods coming right up to the shoulder. The right route. I drove for about 8 minutes without any trouble. The barrier was about 1.5 miles past Montgomery Center, at a low point in the road where the terrain slopes down toward a tributary of the Trout River. 2 orange cones and a Vermont Agency of Transportation sign. Road closed. Flooding. Behind the sign, Route 118 disappeared into a stretch of muddy water covering the asphalt from shoulder to shoulder, deep enough to have pushed one of the cones sideways. There was no getting through, not with a truck, not with any vehicle. I sat there with the engine running, looking at the sign for a while. I picked up my phone, opened the map. The only alternate route to Enosburg Falls that didn't add 45 minutes was Gibou Road, which crosses Longley Bridge. I sat there a little longer. The heater worked. A crow landed on the orange cone that was still standing, stayed for about 3 seconds, and left. I put it in reverse, turned the truck around, and headed back toward Montgomery Center. Gibou Road starts where the last block of houses in the center ends, at an unsigned intersection that most people drive through without noticing. I turned right. The road narrows within the first couple hundred yards, the vegetation closing in from both sides. The old asphalt with its irregular patches that I know by heart. The sun was still low and hit me straight on, the kind of morning light that bleaches everything and doesn't illuminate anything properly. I drove slow. No hurry, that wasn't my own. I passed the Harrigan barn, past the farm where the dirt access road runs down to the sawmill's storage shed, where Marcus had found the deer. I didn't look. I kept going. The woods closed in on both sides for a stretch of about 1/4 mile before the bridge. Here the road loses any real shoulder. Just asphalt and then vegetation immediately. No space between them. The sky appears as a narrow strip overhead. The headlights came on automatically when I entered that stretch, even in daylight, because the sensor reads the drop in light. I heard the river before I saw the bridge. The Trout River was running high. The week's rain had built up, and the sound of the current came through the closed window with an intensity that wasn't normal for this time of year. Fast water over rock, louder than usual. Longley Bridge appeared at the bend. It was the same. Dark wood from the damp, the entrance framed by the side beams, the 1863 plaque in the upper left corner partially covered by moss. The interior dark even with daylight outside. That enclosed space darkness that swallows light before it reaches the far end. I stopped the truck at the entrance. There was no concrete reason to stop. The bridge was intact. The road on the other side was visible from where I sat. Asphalt, pine trees. the straight stretch that climbs toward Enosburg Falls. Everything normal. I sat there with the engine running. The river hit the bridge pilings with a force that transmitted faintly through the floorboards. I could feel the slight vibration, more sensed than heard. The smell of wet wood and mud reached me even with the window closed, coming in through the gaps in the ventilation system. I looked at the interior roof of the bridge. The upper beams were in shadow. You couldn't see them clearly. You never can. I picked up my phone and tried to call Diane. 3 rings, voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail. I tried Oates. 2 rings, then static, then nothing. The signal out here was what it always was. Weak, intermittent, depending on which way the wind was blowing. It had always been that way on this stretch. I set the phone on the passenger seat. I looked at the bridge. I looked in the rearview mirror. Jibu Road empty behind me, dense woods on both sides, no cars in either direction. I looked at the dashboard. Full tank, engine steady, everything working. There was no reason not to go in. I put it in first gear, eased forward to the entrance of the bridge, the floorboards receiving the tires with that familiar sound, that rhythm of old wood I've known since I was 18. I entered the bridge. The dark closed in on both sides immediately. The sound of the engine changed inside the enclosed space, became fuller, more contained. The river below sounded louder here, amplified by the wooden walls, the water striking the bases of the pilings with a force that vibrated up through the floor. I reached the middle of the crossing. I stopped. I don't know why I stopped. It wasn't a decision. It was my foot on the brake before the thought arrived. The silence that moved in when the engine cut off lasted less than a second. Then I heard it, coming from above, the sound of weight redistributing itself slowly across old wood.